Cool. Live stream. So to kind of give all of you a heads up, you might see me turning like this. And if I do that, it's because I'm talking to the audience and seeing what their questions are. Since security protocols make this a chat with them, I am not going to be that person who like waits for the end and then sees. I want to keep them engaged throughout. So you'll see me doing that a lot. Hopefully that means they're more engaged. And all the audience, you guys at home, we have some of you already on, so that's nice. You'll join us, and more people will come, and more people are showing up already. That's crazy. So obviously, this is not something I'm very well versed in doing. I don't know who is yet. Maybe one day it'll become a little more standard practice. But for those of you watching at home, this is part of the Horrible Imaginings Film Festival's Campfire Tales series, where it was built to spotlight more exemplary horror short films than we can fit in a 3-day weekend, basically to make the festival last as long as possible, while also shining a spotlight on a wider, diverse number of filmmakers. I'm going to take one quick second here to I have to get this off my chest before we really get going. So far, everybody's had a lot of great feedback. Hi, Jeffrey Pearson, who's saying hello again on the live feed. The audience that I've seen has been thankful for this little escape. These last couple of weeks have been really rough. And as I've been doing this Campfire Tales series virtually since Friday, really, with Q&As and features and retro films and the like, I have been also cognizant of more people getting murdered and the government taking away the rights of LGBT people. And this has nothing at all to do with any of the films that you guys saw or what we're going to talk about, but I did want to make it really clear that this is something that we as a festival are cognizant about, and we as a festival are going to do what we can in the media landscape to try to combat and use our platform for. And just because we're showing awesome horror movies and some goofy stuff and some scary stuff doesn't mean we're not paying attention. We don't care. All right, now that I said that, let's talk about movies. I'm going to go very briefly to gallery view. That way, hopefully all my folks at home can see everybody at once. Let me double check that here. Yes. All right. This is working. I can't wait. I can't believe it. What we have here, we've got 4 of the short films from this year's selection represented here. We split up these Q&A sessions into 3. That way we can, give more people time per session. I also have to say, I was going to say this before we started live, but it's better if you all hear it. 2 of 4, we've got a 50% alumni count here. Vanessa has been shown from our festival in the past, and so has Neil Stevens. So hey, welcome back to the family, and Shannon and Dylan, welcome to the family. I'm going to introduce everybody. In the top left, my left anyway there, we've got Shannon Hanmer, who directed Not a Baby. Just below her, we've got Neil Stevens, who directed The Monster. Just below Neil, we've got Vanessa Newell, who directed Bull Mountain Lookout. And then below me, at least as far as I see it, yes, it's completely different for them. Thankfully, your names are listed next to your faces. We've got Dylan Boom, who directed Carl. Welcome, and let's see how this goes. You'll also hear my daughter in the background, so if I go on mute, it's usually because I'm going to save you from her screaming. But thank you.
Right on cue.
Oh, we've got audience. So hi, Jeff Alderman, Jeff Pierce, Jeff Jeffries, Jenny Ricewig. You're showcasing the work of creative people who make art, and that's something we need. Thank you, Jenny. I like to think that that's the case. Let's who do I start with? That's the hard thing. Let's go with in alphabetical order by film title. Let's go with Bull Mountain Lookout. Hi, Vanessa. How are you? I'm going to speaker view. That way, when you start talking, hopefully it'll just be your visage filling everybody's screen. So we talked a little bit about the introduction of in the introduction about Bull Mountain Lookout. So why don't you talk a little bit about filming in the outdoors and I guess your idea for combining the horror and comedy that you do so well. I mean, I think this is almost like something that you like. Everything I've seen of you has been kind of horror comedy. So can you talk about how those two work so well together for you?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of messed up things in the world, and it's kind of interesting to address them, but with a little bit of humor and look at them through a slightly different lens. So I tend to do. I'm not a big horror fan, but I love horror comedy. So and there's usually monsters or an animal or a creature involved, which I love. I think every movie should have a creature or a monster or some kind of out of control animal. And I just like people trying, dealing with their own hubris, right? Making mistakes and either figuring it out or not figuring it out and, possibly losing their lives. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Cautionary tales in a funny way, right?
Yeah. Even in your answer, there's some humor to it. Bringing up monsters and creatures. It's funny because we have creatures almost throughout, but I'm gonna have to direct this next one to Dylan with Carl because, in a way, if someone asked me, is Carl a creature feature kind of movie? I would say maybe. What would be your answer to that?
Are you asking me if I think it's a creature comic?
I mean, what if someone asked that, and what would you say?
Well, the entire reception of Carl has been really strange across the board because some people see it as horror, some people see it as experimental, some people see it just as suspenseful, and I guess it's all those things. So it was meant to be ambiguous, and when we made it, we didn't think of genre in mind, really, besides keeping people entertained. And I guess, we definitely wanted an element of suspense and all that. And we wanted it to be interpretive and ambiguous. So I think it's really amazing when you have that intention and then people kind of make their own conclusions from it. Like the first festivals we got into with it were experimental genre festivals. And me and my co-writer were like, oh, we didn't even know this was an experimental film. So it's just interesting how people receive it and the interpretations they have of it. So I'm really open for whatever people make out of it.
I think anyone who's ever had to drive alone at night in the dark, in a non-really populated area, feel something when they watch Carl. My wife and I still talk about a time we drove in Northern California through the mountains and trees, and it was literally no light except for what our headlights.
Yeah.
And there was one radio station. It was a rental car. And what it happened to be playing was all songs about Satan.
Oh my God.
It was like Devil Comes Down to Georgia and Sympathy for the Devil. And we were like, what the fuck is going on?
Well, yeah, it's funny you say that because that was literally the inspiration from my other co-writer, Barrett. His dad had an experience like that. And that's kind of where the story came from, was us both seeing a film of a guy driving in the middle of the desert with nowhere to go and thinking that was pretty interesting and then building on from that. So
in a Vega. Was that a Vega?
It was a oh my God, now I'm forgetting the name. It was a God, I forget the car name now. I think it's a, oh man, I Everyone's gonna kill me for not remembering the name of this.
The cars
right now.
would be very upset.
They filmed it 2 years ago. I honestly can't remember. Yeah, it's a pretty common car though. I need to look it up now.
Well, it used to be a common car.
Yeah, right. Back in the it's definitely from the 70s. I want to say
Yeah.
it's like 75 or something. Yeah.
All right, so let's bring Shannon into this, and Shannon and Neil will both be able to talk a little bit about creatures, I think, because it's a little more, I don't know. Their films are both, I love both their films because, well, I have a kid. I also am an early childhood education major, and I've always been fascinated with how horror, growing up with horror, is so potent when you're a kid. And so whenever there's a good, solid child actor, and even though the children per se in Shannon's aren't super young, not like in Neil's, for example, it's just more potent. So Shannon, I'm going to start with you because yours, as we kind of talked about in the intro, is more personal. I want to get your take on scary things through the eyes of the young.
Well, yeah, I feel like watching horror movies as a kid it affected my adult life. And when I was kind of look back on how it started, it's those films I watched between 5 and 10 years old. Because when you're that young, your idea of the world is really small. So when you see a scary monster and you try to fall asleep and there's a scary monster in the closet, it is as real as anything. It's in fact I find more terrifying than anything. If you're lucky and have a decent childhood, it's one of the scariest things you can deal with. So for me, I feel like I'm still just as scared. Like my whole life is exposure therapy. I'm like, so I just keep watching horror movies until I'm not scared. It's not working. So it's always kind of, that's always in my head on what's too young, especially talking to other people who work in horror film like I do. We always kind of try to get to the bottom of it, whether it was, their parents' influence, older siblings' influence, or, discovering it on your own. It just comes down to kind of that, facing that original wonder you had when you watch a horror film.
I think you nailed it there at the end too. The wonder you had, with kids, the curiosity is still so rich, that feeling of awe around the world. And even like the real definition of the word awesome, it's not only that you are wowed by something, but that you are terrified by something.
Mm-hmm.
Fear comes into it. And I think for some of us, particularly those of us like myself, who find it actually really hard to stay scared of things. I don't have the same experience where you say that you don't get scared anymore, or that you still get scared rather. For me, I actively try to access my younger brain to try to be scared because, and there's my kid. He's not scared of anything, including me having a Q&A. So, Neil, let's bring you into it. First of all, I kind of want you to piggyback on that a little bit, but also I want you to focus on your young actor, because his face, his scared face, his worried face, it's fantastic. It's so cinematic. So talk about getting those facial features out of him, and where you found your actor, the young actor.
Yeah, he was incredible. Just a brilliant actor for someone, especially his age. I mean, he's just one of those naturals. His name's Aaron Bradshaw, and we had an audition. Some kids came in, and I think he didn't even have the sides, and he just came in and he was the kid. He was the character, and you can just see he's thinking. He's just got a very perceptive mind, and I didn't really have to do much. He was very scared. I remember the day we started shooting, he kept coming up to me and going, is she here? And like, is who here? is the skeleton woman here? I'm like, she's not here yet. And then like an hour later, he'd be like, is she here? Is she here? Like he was so nervous about facing this creature that, I mean, that's like that fear, that was a real fear. And I think that that came through in his performance. That's that childlike fear that you were just talking about of for him, it is real. Like she was a real creature, and you can't fake that. It's a surreal expression.
Wow. Is he doing okay?
Yeah.
Last I heard, he's doing wonderful.
Okay.
Once he met the skeleton woman, and it was okay. But yeah, he was. He's a great kid. He's a great, and he's a really good actor, and I think he has a very promising future.
So I'm gonna go to the chat here. A couple of things are being said. A lot about Scarlett screaming in the background, but one thing I've said about Bull Mountain Lookout is Bull Mountain was the perfect representation of a real campfire tale. I actually think that's kind of true. Vanessa, do you want to talk about I think I asked you about the shooting outside and the setting a little bit, but we didn't quite get to it. That is such a classic setting for why I called this Campfire Tales. People sitting around a campfire telling themselves spooky things, and you gave it to us quite literally on camera. Can you talk about your setting and why you went there and what was special about that for you?
Well, it's always fun to be around a campfire and hear somebody tell a scary story. We weren't in the forest. We were on the sidewalk basically in Los Angeles, right? There's a row of houses behind us, and it happened to be this strip of land that had a lot of bushes. And so we shot that out. And then I got the drone footage miles away, right? And then we built the stage, a set for the lookout. So it was all a big cheat, which was kind of fun. But, a funny thing about that story is my writing partner and I, he wrote a first draft and it was all dudes. And I had that script for a long time and always liked it, but I didn't quite know how I was going to do it or how I could connect to it. So I was like, let me take a stab at it. So I played with it and I changed the gender of all the characters and changed up the ending, kind of gave it that surprise twist. And that's where that kind of ended up. And I think it's kind of a fresher perspective than the original idea of it. So that's just a little bit about it.
To what degree did switching the genders add to the freshness of the idea?
I don't know. I mean, there's the camaraderie or lack of camaraderie. There's the relationship between the two girls in the lookout, right? Because I didn't even change the dialogue there, right? And so now we have no longer a heterosexual relationship, but an incidentally lesbian relationship. Has no real bearing on the movie, but it does show that there are these other people that exist, and whether they are hetero or not hetero, they still have relationships and believe each other or don't believe each other, etc.
Jeff Alderman saying, from the start, the Ranger's expression fascinated me. Maybe a bit about that direction of that character. Can you talk about the Ranger a tad?
Yeah, no, she's lovely to work with. And comedy's fun to direct because you usually get people that have a lot of energy and they bring that to the set. But I knew the one thing that I wanted was her just to be static. So a lot of it, I said, just tell it to the fire, just don't move and tell it to the fire. And so a lot of what she did was sort of channel that and then just turn, just the head turns and the looks were so expressive. So that was kind of fun to see that happen.
From Jeffrey Pearson regarding Carl. It reminded me of an old Twilight Zone type story when a person who doesn't realize that they're dead continues driving and being followed. I think particularly we're thinking of the Hitchhiker episode there, which is a masterpiece of an episode. Would you say you were influenced by things like the Twilight Zone for specifically this, or is that maybe just something in your DNA that came out?
Well, actually, so to answer your first question, Vanessa, it is a 1970 Ford Maverick. Just found out.
Okay.
About that. But yeah, so I guess in a way, Twilight Zone is for sure something that I think is the back of my mind and the back of my co-writer's mind when we thought about it. But in all reality, we were really thinking about films that have like parables and like really interesting symbolisms. Like I guess a more recent film would kind of be a film like Mother of Darren Aronofsky's, where everything is kind of a symbol and stuff, and it's more symbolic and based in surrealism. So that was kind of something we thought about more. But like genre-wise, yeah, we definitely thought about like a thriller, Twilight Zone-y, non-linear kind of story. I mean, I would say that the Twilight Zone usually comes to a conclusion where you're like, that made sense. But ours doesn't. So yeah, that's the only difference I would say. But as far as like the mood and the atmosphere, for sure.
I mean, like the Twilight Zone example here is an audience member kind of putting their own baggage or experiences onto the ambiguity that you leave as a blank slate in Carl. What is the weirdest interpretation you've heard?
It's hard for me to even say that they're weird because I kind of like any interpretation that someone comes up with, unless it's like, which I haven't heard something completely outrageous. But yeah, I really like any interpretation because that means that people are kind of personalizing it, which was what our intention was. So a lot of people saying that he was dead the whole time and this is just an endless like nightmarish afterlife that he's in, or that I just like this, that they think the symbolisms mean one thing when they may not mean that to me, but it's like, it's totally fine that it does to you, because for me and my co-writer, it was very specific. Like what's going on beneath the surface is actually like quite simple and quite specific, but just masked in all of this like genre and interpretation and ambiguity that was just like, hopefully made it a little more convoluted and interesting.
I hope we never find out what your real reasons were.
I'll tell you. I don't care. I'll tell you.
I don't want to know. I really don't.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody, maybe someone on the chat will chime in. But I like mystery. I don't know. I do. I have something for Shannon here in the chat. But I do have to say there's in the Sandman comic series, which I read when I was like in high school, one thing that always stood out to me is that Cain killed Abel at one point because he gave away the end to a mystery, and giving away the mystery ruins the story. So
fair enough.
Okay, Shannon. So people are Jenny Ricewig is great. So I think she's identifying with your siblings. I was the bad older sibling that made my two young sibs watch Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. And to be honest, we all got pretty scared. So I don't know. I think with this, it's because it's less of a question. I do want to bring up your kind of family experiences because that's fun. With your sibs and with horror and why that kind of drives your art, which you've talked about a little bit. But first of all, when your siblings tried to scare you with this stuff, did they also get scared? Did it backfire in that way? And how did that make your relationship with them grow? Was this something that becomes like how you're close? You know what I mean?
I would say it defined our relationship because what would happen is if I would force myself to watch it and pretend to be all cool and say, I'm not scared. And then I would have nightmares and my mom would get mad at him and punish him and he wouldn't be allowed to watch horror movies for a little while. So he would take it out on me. And the film was initially a lot longer, but we had technical issues, so I had to cut all that stuff out. But yeah, it really affected their relationship. And then it became his friend who we see at the beginning had a bigger part, and he would come in and the brother would convince the little sister that they're pals again and tell mom you want him to come over, and he'll bring over horror movies. And so it was just a continuous cycle of me pretending to be okay, and then we'd watch Prince of Darkness and I'd cry for a week, and it would just go over and over again. And then suddenly I'm like 20, I'm like, do I like horror movies, or am I just constantly trying to prove something? I'm still asking myself that, but it turns out that's pretty much all I work on. Every film I've been producing for like 6 years now has been a horror film, so I think I like it.
So in the first live stream we did, unfortunately, Kate Dolan, who directed Cat Calls, couldn't confirm to join us, and I really wanted to ask her some things. And so, even though it has nothing to do with your movie and it's not going to be specific to her movie, I want to get your thoughts on something. So her movie Cat Calls is, what we call horror is so broad. Like, we're talking with Dylan about Carl and how that fits. Neil's, we can clearly see, is just an awesome child-based horror movie. With Vanessa, it's very classic but comedy. And the kind of thing that's tying all these together is that it's looking to scare the audience. But with Cat Calls and films like it, I don't think that it's really looking to scare the audience, because her film is about basically the monster kills someone who is a serial harasser of women, right? So there's a justice behind the monster, and in a way, I think of it as kind of a dark wish fulfillment. Like, how do I get my anger out through this horror? So as an audience member, you are rooting and gunning for the monster. And I'm not talking about the same way that, people watching Friday the 13th, they want to see these teenagers die. They want to see Jason wield the machete. But, that's a different kind of rooting for the monster, because, there's no sense that Jason really is doing that with any kind of real like, this is more like a justice revenge fantasy. And I didn't get the chance to ask Kate about that. I might bring this up with all of you, because Shannon, you're talking about, do I really like horror because it still scares me so much? Have you ever made a horror movie that you used to, like, get those dark feelings out, like, in a way that is, you're directing your rage into your art? And would you do something like that?
When I first started making films well over a decade ago in film school, I definitely explored those. They definitely had much darker themes, explored my relationship with death. I was always obsessed with death, and I didn't necessarily pair that together with horror films at the time, especially as a kid and a teenager. I was just very obsessed with death and studying it and the occult and all of that. And so I definitely saw that in my earlier years of filmmaking, for sure. And it was helpful. With this one was more exploring, because I don't know about the guys, but I know I'm constantly asked, well, how did you get into horror? There's an assumption that, whatever their assumption is, you probably know it. So I'm always answering that question. And so with this script, I was kind of, to be honest, I was trying to get a grant, and I'm in Canada, I'm in Toronto, and they really frown upon horror films, and I could never get grant money for the films I want to make, which is the film within the film. That's the movie I want to make. Mm-hmm. This is a drama exploring that and kind of being able to use that money to do a body horror, which is what I personally like to make and work on. So this one was more of just diving into that, to answer that question that I'm constantly getting asked, why you like horror. And I felt in making this, every person I gave the script to, every woman was like, I relate to that. I relate to that, that getting asked that question, but also those moments of childhood when you felt like you won't like it. It's horror. It's not for you. It's not for girls. And that was definitely, when the script started, that was what I was intending to do with it. Of course, the end result is a little bit different, but that was my intent.
Do you think we'll see your film within a film? Because I'm pretty sure,
man.
like,
If someone needs to give me money to make Murder Babies 2, I would be thrilled. I would be so thrilled. That's right up my alley.
If anyone on the chat has nest egg, listen. Yeah, if it makes you feel any better, we're in the States and you can't get money for anything. So I want to, I kind of want to throw that question to everybody. So Neil, it's been a minute since you talked, so we'll start with you. I want to get your take on, those different aspects of horror. So I think you were even at a festival when one of our themes was, monsters versus, like, I forget. I think I did call it like dark fantasy, like
dark wish fulfillment.
I think is what I call it. It's a really interesting thing because the wish fulfillment thing really, like Revenge, for example, on Shudder, like there's a lot of wish fulfillment stuff in there. When you're really rooting for her to just slaughter all those douchebags, like, how does, like, talk about that a little bit? I don't know. I'm really getting heady here, but I can't help it. That's just how my brain works. Because I don't get asked that question as much as Shannon. Why do you like it? But everybody gets it. Why horror? There's a whole documentary called Why Horror. And I do know that some people get asked it more than others. And I do know the reasons for the question for some people are different from other people's getting asked that question. But I'm always coming back to, like, well, the answer is completely different depending on what the horror is. Like Vanessa's comedy or Neil's kid talking to his dad, getting these creepy stories being told to him for whatever reason, we'll get into that too, is a different reason for the horror than, say, Revenge or Catcalls, or I should have had some titles prepared, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
This isn't supposed to scare me. I'm supposed to be like, fuck yeah, let's do this. That's a completely different thing. What do y'all think about that? Does anyone have any? If you don't, you can.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I love about horror is whatever stuff that's bubbling in the subconscious or the conscious that's just really bothering you. It's a way of kind of getting that out. So I think when I did the dark wish fulfillment, I don't know, maybe there was some anger there or whatever. With the monster, a lot of it was just incredible fear and desperation with kind of the way. I mean, I don't want to, to me, horror is political. I don't want to get too political here, but I was terrified. I mean, truly terrified by this sort of like kill or be killed, refuse to show vulnerability, refuse to show weakness, a repression of the feminine, a repression of the other. It's truly terrified me. And so this was just a way of exploring that fear I have, how monsters are created, which are when there is an extreme, when there is an imbalance in anything. And right now there is an imbalance, and I'm terrified of that imbalance. And so I put it in this movie. I don't know if that comes across. I mean, I didn't want it to be overtly that. I mean, I wanted it to be a contained story.
I think I can answer that from the audience, actually. Jeff Alderman. With the monster, I felt something was off, but not sure with the father's stories. Then it turns out to fit perfectly with the revelation. So I think you got it across.
Yeah. Good.
I do have to say, someone chimed in and said, in all caps, loved Murder Babies too. What are your thoughts, Dylan? And then we'll go to Vanessa, if any thoughts on this topic.
I guess I have two thoughts on it. I guess the first one is when I'm thinking about, I don't know if this is just me, but when I'm thinking about making something, I don't really think about genre very often. I kind of think about the characters or just an idea, whatever it can be. A simple idea, like for this, it really started from my co-writer saying, you know, what's creepy is the idea or the image of a guy driving in the desert and with nowhere to go and running out of gas. And I was like, that is kind of crazy. So with that comes the genre. I felt like the genre followed that idea. But then for me personally, I actually hated horror almost my entire life. It scared the shit out of me. So like, I remember not being able to sleep after watching Nightmare on Elm Street when I was like 10 or something. And it was awful. But then, you know, so later in life, it took me a while to come around to watching like, you know, Repulsion or The Exorcist or anything like that. It took me a while to come around to it, but I realized that there were such great stories in horror that I needed to watch them, and I needed to get over that fear because they would stick with me for so long. They would really just like, which means they're great in a lot of ways, you know, but they would like live with me when they were done really well for a long time. And so yeah, I mean, that's kind of the magic of the genre, is that it can in a great way, you know, like you were saying, Neil, about the messaging. I think my favorite horror movies now are the ones that actually do have a message wrapped up in the genre that maybe you're not really aware of at first, but they kind of hit you afterwards. And like I immediately, I mentioned it before, but I immediately think of Repulsion. That's probably one of my favorite horror movies because you don't really realize it's about this woman's story and, you know, the suffering of being paranoid and all that. And I love those kind of things because you can tell a message, you know, in any genre you want. It's just what fits that message the best, I think, for you, and what's more personal about it. Because, you know, I think all films are personal to some level. So yeah, so I'm kind of new to the horror game, in all honesty.
I mean, that seems to be, I mean, I don't know if new is it, but 3 out of 4 of you now have at least expressed some apprehension with horror in general, or how it continues to scare you. That's fascinating, including Vanessa. So hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
Do you have any thoughts on this topic? We've been kind of rambling on about it for a bit, but I'm fascinated. So
I definitely think, you know, all film has a message, and whether the creator knows it or not, they're definitely saying something. And the thing that I like about horror, one is, I mean, who doesn't love to see, you know, a creature, whether it's funny or, you know, scary, but sort of the imagination that goes in to a creature. But in the case of a lot of the films, the stories I like to tell is this idea of community, and that we need each other, and that we need to listen to each other. And if we don't, then you're going to end up being one of the people that gets ripped apart by the monster. So I like the obsession with petty things. You know, you could have a group of people who are arguing about something, and there could be zombies on the other side of the door, and yet they're still wrapped up in their own personal dramas rather than working together. So this idea of sort of the cautionary tale of you know, dealing with your own hubris, and so there's a humane side to it, but also, I mean, everybody ends up dead in my movie, but you know, I mean, they obviously didn't heed the tale, and which is kind of nice because the humor sort of distance you from like the horrific reality of, you know, the real world, but can also tackle some of those issues with, you know, not in a serious way, right? Sort of like make it a little more palatable, at least for somebody like me. But I do find that interesting that most of you guys here don't like horror, and it probably is because it's so scary, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I know. So maybe that's a way for me, horror comedy is to take the edge off of it, right? To distance myself from it a little bit by changing the narrative and sort of controlling it, creating these stories, yet having, you know, that distance of comedy. I don't know.
Miguel, is it cool if I ask a question, or
please? Oh no, we're in an open forum.
Okay, cool. I was curious with you guys, like, about what you were saying about the fear thing. Like, do you all three, you think that's kind of part of it? Is that you have to be fearful in a way to approach something? Like, if this is not a genre that all of us are so used to, is that kind of part of it? Like, it's almost like a scary thing that it's like, well, I gotta follow that intuition somehow.
I'm gonna just say Shannon. Why don't you go first?
I mean, whoever wants to.
I saw
It's a kind of
Shannon
question.
thinking.
Yeah. I think I'm always trying to get down to why I'm afraid of something. For me, I hate jump scares.
Yeah.
So I find them whenever I see a crappy new movie, I'm always going back to the horror films I like. For me, Night of the Hunter, The Haunting,
Oh yeah.
Hammer films. You know, I always want to go back and go, okay, let's kind of like cleanse my palate and remember why I like
Yep.
horror movies, and what I'm looking for in a modern horror film. And when it comes to when I'm making one, I think at this point in my life, like the stuff I'm producing, especially, I just want something entertaining.
Mhm.
And that's why body horror tends to be, kind of something that I find is the most connective thing in the films that I look at, because I think that's something that everybody is afraid of. You know, if it's like you're not into zombies or you're not into ghosts, everybody's afraid of something within tearing you apart. I think that's something that everybody can be afraid of, and that's what I like, is if you can evict any kind of visceral reaction in your audience. I think that's incredible. And because if somebody gets me in that, I go home and I'm creeped out after watching a movie, which is kind of easy to do with me, to be honest. But I think it's amazing and powerful how films can stick with me, even if I don't like the film. A year later, I'm still thinking about how sick I felt, or how confused, how icky I felt. I think that's really powerful, a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
Neil, go for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I live to like just terrify people and make them feel sick. I like that's the greatest feeling. Truthfully, the greatest feeling in the entire world is to like somebody to come up and say, "Oh my God, that horrified me," because I think like I don't know. Maybe I have an inflated view of like how beneficial to society horror is, but I think that experience of like dealing with these monsters and these demons, I think that helps the soul. I think it helps society. Like we need more of this sort of facing our fears and these monsters and demons, because if we don't, we can easily become that ourselves. So when I mean, look, there's a lot of horror that's not looking to do that, and then they're just looking to get cheap thrills. Like that exists too. In any genre, there's going to be on the cheap side, but I think ultimately the really great ones, like you talked about, Repulsion, The Haunting, made me sick. I saw that as a kid. I felt sick for 3 days after I saw this, 1960 black and white film with no monsters in it. I felt physically ill, and I've never forgotten that. Whether that's a good thing, I don't know. I guess I'm here now, but yeah, I think it's a great thing, and yeah, I'm all about it, I guess.
Before we ask Vanessa if she has something to add, first of all, I have to point out, Neil, I think the last time I saw you in person was at the Egyptian, where one of the 35 millimeter films they were showing was The Haunting.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Which was magnificent.
Yeah.
One of the greatest pieces of cinematography ever. But I also want to bring up some of the things being said in the chat, which are relevant to the conversation. First of all, Jeffrey Pearson starts kind of pontificating of what he finds scary. Human monsters often scarier than classic made-up sci-fi monsters. The evil that hides within when you least expect it. I think that's kind of dovetailing with what we're saying. Jeff, it's definitely here. Horror is a catharsis. Don't stop making it. Horror is definitely a message. So I do want to point out something that I think we do need to keep in mind, because I obviously I run a horror film festival. And although my definition of the genre is kind of aligned a little bit with some of the things Dylan has been saying. Like, clearly, I mean, if we look at this conversation, one of my big missions was to challenge the notion that people think all I show are movies with guys with machetes chasing scantily clad women in the woods. That's absolutely like, yeah, it exists, but it's, one thing, and it's not necessarily at all what we're looking for. And I find that a lot of the most interesting stuff that absolutely fits within what would be of interest to us as horror lovers, come from a stance of, we weren't planning on making a horror movie or genre. We weren't trying to fit into the genre. So even now when people ask me what kind of movies I show, I don't even say we show horror movies. I say we show movies that express fear or anxiety in some way, which I think is a little more blanket statement. Neil pointed out the benefits of terrifying people. And my other life as an educator, I do want to point out too, not everybody's the same. So, but the people who are going to come to a film festival called Horrible Imaginings, they want the goods. So, but we do have to remember it's not for everybody, and it's okay if it's not their cup of tea. Some people really get catharsis from them, like from this, like Jeffrey Alderman said, and some people don't. Some people get disturbed forever and need to go to therapy, and that's no good either. Vanessa, how about you?
You know, I am averse to creatures that are too human-like, and I guess that's just because my own fear of how humans can be terrible to each other. But what I have issues with is when, like, zombie movies, or some zombie movies I love, and certain zombie movies I feel like it's almost a way to give a character permission to kill or brutalize another human formed thing, right? And then we just, say, well, they're a zombie. So I take issue with that personally. I can't watch those, but I think the scariest movie I've seen in the last, 15 years is The Descent. And that one just killed me. That was like, I was home alone watching that at night, and that was just, I found that really, really terrifying. Those are, what's that?
In The Descent, for you, what was scary for you? Was it the monsters, or was it crawling through those little holes?
I think all of it. I mean, and then when they held back those monsters for so long, and then when they showed them, they were so horrifying. Kind of humanish form, but that just.
I thought the monsters were neat. I didn't find them that scary, but I was hyperventilating when they're crawling through those little holes.
Yeah.
That was always my thing with The Descent. I was like, oh man, the worst thing ever is I guess that's my Achilles heel, though, I guess, is the claustrophobia. The cell bugged me too much on torture. I guess that means the cell with J-Lo.
Yeah,
I actually like that film.
Isn't Vincent D'Onofrio in that too?
Yeah. Oh my God, he's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, he's not good in that.
Yeah. Wow, we have gone way off topics.
No, it's great. We can just talk about Vincent D'Onofrio if you want.
There's a lot you can say about.
There's a lot to talk about.
That's the worst movie to watch if you're ingesting hallucinogenic substances.
Oh God, I can imagine.
Worst movie to watch. I do not recommend doing that. Not that I would.
No, exactly. Yeah.
I've got a question. I don't know. This is more of a fact question. What's one of the longest running TV shows? Law and Order SVU. Oh, no. Okay. It's a statement.
That seems more related.
Longest running TV shows is Law and Order SVU. Monsters and Catharsis every week for 21 years. That's interesting. Interesting. And it kind of goes toward what we were talking about with, like, what really defines the genre, because absolutely, like, SVU in particular is like pedophiles and sex crimes and stuff like that. Absolutely horrific. I never really watched the show, but I know what it's about. I don't know if any of you watched that show.
I used to a lot, but when I was growing up, I did. My mom used to love it.
I'm thinking more about what Vanessa said about her choice of monsters. And Vanessa, you use them more of as an escape, I would think. What do you think?
What do you mean, escape in what
way?
Well,
so, like, your monsters are fun rather than, like, pedophiles, So, like, SVU, we're facing, I guess, again, I confess I don't really watch the show, but you know, you're facing what is some sort of reality of darkness in the human condition. But your monsters are more like, I want to have popcorn and laugh with my friends, and it feels more like an escape.
Right. And it's okay if somebody gets their
Yeah.
head ripped off or their arm ripped off by this monster, right? And I think part of it is because, you know, the victim is a jerk, right? If you're a jerk, then you're going to get killed. And
Fulfillment, Vanessa.
yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, you know what? And I want to clarify, I'm not belittling escape. I think that's really important too. I just like to get my head around this stuff. Let me look. Any questions from our chat?
What's really interesting about SUV, I don't really watch it, never really watched it, but is that it creates a sort of contained environment. So this horrible thing happens and then it gets solved at the end of the day, right? And then we can all feel good about it. And then we can all go and do our own lives, which, I mean, to some element, this sort of satisfaction in society may be good. But on the other hand, it's sort of just
not real.
It's not real, right? It kind of absolves you from having to do or deal with that issue, right? It's all been solved for you. So I find that a little bit problematic, but I think a lot of police procedurals do that too, sort of give a sort of false sense of security that the world is okay and everything's going to be solved, and then you can go and do your life.
And trust the police.
Exactly.
And that's why the revolution can never be televised.
Bull Mountain, they broke the rules, drinking, etc., whatever. We've got a comment saying that your characters broke the rules, so that's why they ended up getting slaughtered. Well, it looks like we're wrapped up in the chat. We've got just a couple minutes left, so I'm going to give everybody. I said this in the first live stream. One thing that's nice about virtual is when I push this out to be seen by everybody, and you all will get a copy of this, by the way. When I ask you what projects you're working on now, I'll be able to add links and all that kind of stuff. We can't do that on a stage, so
that's true.
We go. I'm going to go to gallery, and let's start with Shannon. Where can people find you? What are you working on? Where can we see your other stuff?
Well, the next thing that will be coming out is a feature film called PG Psycho Gorman, directed by Steven Kostanski. You guys probably know him from The Void or my favorite, Manborg. That film, obviously, it's up in the air. I can't tell you if it's coming out in a theater. I don't know, but it's definitely going to be on Shudder next year. Okay. And yeah, I'll put up a link for the trailer. It's so much fun. I actually jumped onto this right after I finished my short. So working with kids was kind of carried that skill over into this one. It's really fun. Everything you want to see from a Steve Kostanski film.
Did
Let
you
me
write
know?
it?
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm a producer.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
I'm not a baby. It was me kind of diving back into directing, but I'm mainly a producer. So cool. I have two other projects that are in development with Chris Nash. He did the special effects. He did the Murder Babies in Not a Baby. So we have a couple of features that are in development right now, but the next thing to come up will be PG, Psycho Gorman.
And I'll say this for everybody: if something's not quite out yet, let me know when it is, and we'll push it out for you as well. Neil, what's up with you?
I've got a short in festivals, the virtual festival circuit, I guess, called Face Your Fears. If you look behind me, it's a game I invented where you pick your darkest fear and then you play this game where you face your fear. And a young woman who's terrified of the dark basically discovers it, and she has to learn to face her fear. And if you beat the game, you cure your fear. But if you don't, well, you'll have to watch it to find out. So yeah, that's currently in festivals. It's not public, but hopefully once it finishes its festival run, people will be able to watch it.
Dylan.
Yeah, so I have a short that I finished. God, it was like last November now, but we're just kind of starting because of COVID in the early part of the year, the first quarter of the year. It kind of really made it tough for the festival circuit. So now we finally are starting our festival circuit. We're doing our first festival with it next month. It's called Pieces, and it's completely different from Carl. It's a relationship drama, so it's very different. But yeah, look out for that if you'd like to. And then I guess just features on the horizon and other shorts that are in the works that aren't haven't come to fruition yet, but always trying to keep things moving somehow.
Excellent. And Vanessa, and then we do have one question I will ask, but let's hear from you, Vanessa.
So I'm working on writing a feature, and it's a sci-fi comedy. And kind of my log line, just to give you a little piece of it, is what if a group of suburban moms were helping the government cover up a secret alien superhighway in their neighborhood?
That's tight.
So I live in an area that has an airport, a gas field, an oil refinery, and a water treatment plant. And I think those four things are probably very dangerous and enticing to an alien population. So
logical conclusion. I agree.
Yes.
And we've shown your shorts, like for example, Hazelwood. Are any of those available online for people?
Yeah, actually Hazelwood is. Yeah.
Hazelwood's so fun.
Yeah, Hazelwood
was to see Hazelwood.
It's a 3D movie, but unfortunately you can only see it in 2D. So it was really designed as 3D. And so I'm really sad about that movie because you don't get the full flavor of it watching it in 2D. And we had some limitations with the framing with this particular camera that we use. It was one of those old Panasonics. But yeah, so
it's still fun in 2D. It still has Richard Mole and Liesl Hansen, so we're good.
And Richard Band did the music, from the Band Brothers, and he did the music on Bull Mountain. A little plug for him.
I did notice that. Yeah. Dang it! I was gonna ask about Richard Band, but I'm gonna ask this instead. So in the chat, right at the 11th hour, we have a question from Emily Bennett. Who's actually one of our award-winning directors. She directed Lovers, which came out last year and is available on Alter. So I'm giving you a plug, Emily, even though you didn't ask me to. To all filmmakers, this might keep us going for a few more minutes, so I extend time. Okay. To all filmmakers, what do you think is the role of horror in the current social landscape? And I think we're going to go Shannon, Neil, Dylan, Vanessa.
Well, that's a good question. Horror, when you start studying horror, you realize that horror is a constant mirror to the current political situation, and it always has been. Whether it's immigration or Cold War, overpopulation, whatever the issue is, you can go decade by decade and point out the films that reflect that. So I think it's, as long as filmmakers are free to write their stories, you're always going to be able to look back and see what was really going on. It's to me, it's where you can hide the truth, because not everybody's, not everybody is going to be as critical when you're making a horror film. They're going to see just the surface of it, but if you look deeper, you're going to see the truth.
X.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of a lot of the stuff I already said earlier about, just dealing with monsters. And I like the quote from Nietzsche, be careful for people who are fighting the monsters that they don't become the monster themselves. Because it's very easy to become one yourself when you're looking for monsters everywhere. And I think we're demonizing a lot of people. We're making monsters out of people who represent difference. And I think, horror can serve many roles, but I think an empathy for the other and understanding of the other is one of the most important things, because we need empathy for others. So I think that's been an interesting role of horror that I've seen, especially in the last 5-10 years, movies like Get Out and whatnot. I think they play a large role in kind of shaping the world. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of piggyback on both what you two just said. I mean, I think the benefit of horror is, like you said, being able to have messaging that may turn some people off if it was told in a dramatic way or told in a comedic way. And I think it can be like, for an example, with Get Out, like how many people responded to that movie about racial injustice and just racial divides in this country by the way it was told, you know? And I think because of that, that's what the genre can benefit. Hopefully all films have the mirror to society. All great films should have the mirror to society, regardless of genre. But I do think that horror films can make it more accessible for certain people that, you know, also want to be entertained, but don't realize like, oh shit, there's a bigger picture at play here, you know?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think Jordan Peele has just really tapped into something.
Yeah.
You know, and has sort of set the stage for even more overt, relevant, you know, things, as Shannon said, like immigration, race, the environment, all of those things, I think often, you know, or can come up, gender issues, gender relations and all that can get, you know, played out and exposed and thought about. So it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Agree.
That was an awesome final question. And we're at time. So I'm going to do this every time. First, I thank everybody to my right who is on the chat, taking part in engaging with you, engaging with your art. Always remember the audience is 50% of the conversation. So that's why I try to go back and forth as much as possible. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day to talk to me about not just your work, but you know, the higher things around it. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for sharing with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for watching too.
You too.
Of course.
Yeah.
And the films will still be available for another couple of days, and then that'll be it. So you can tell people if they haven't seen it yet, they can still watch them. This chat will still be available to be watched, just recorded.